Today we're diving into Sonnet's June 2025 Maker's Box, plus some thrifted and thrifty finds you'll love. Let's get creative on a budget. Welcome to the Chic Show. Sonnet's Garden Blooms is a YouTube channel, and Sonnet is a fabulous creator, and I have her channel listed in the description box below. She has a creative community and a Maker's Box that you can subscribe to. You definitely want to check that out. For this first project, I am using some air-dried clay and the Sparrow's Nest mold by IOD. When using a silicone mold with air-dry clay, you do want to brush the inside of the mold with some cornstarch so that the clay will release easily. Then you just flip it over and let gravity take it right out. This is a ceramic ornament from Dollar Tree, and this is one of Sonnet's digital downloads that she includes with her Maker's Box, and I have printed it out on some rice paper. I've just placed my paper down over the ornament because I can see through it, and I'm placing my nest on there just to decide exactly where I want everything to be. I used a wet paintbrush and traced around the ornament on the section of the rice paper that I wanted to use, and then you can just gently tear it into that shape. And if you look at the rice paper, it does have a really deckled edge. It has all these fibers, and that works out nicely for most projects. Now I'm spritzing my rice paper with water, and I'm using Mod Podge to adhere the rice paper to the ornament. I am doing this in sections, and once I get one section down, I go over the top of it with more of the Mod Podge. Once the Mod Podge has dried, I'm going to decide again exactly where I want my nest, and then I'm going to paint my nest using some black chalk paint as well as some brown chalk paint and antique wax. I used Type Bond Quick and Thick to glue my mold onto the ornament. And as you can see, I placed my glue down first and placed the ornament or the nest on top. And then I went back and just cleaned up the edges where any glue was seeping out. Now I'm using some gold rub and buff to go around the edges of the ornament. I'm also dry brushing over the nest to bring out those details. I'm going to add a little bit of a stamped phrase at the top of the mold using the IOD's ephemeral stamp. I highlighted some areas on the bird and flower with some more rub and buff using a small brush. I replaced the jute twine hanger with this silk twine. I'm really loving these muted vintage colors. This is a little drawer that hangs on the wall as well that I thrifted, but it looks like it originally came from Dollar General. I'm also going to be using this decoupage paper. This is by Roya Cycled, and she provides 2 papers to Sonnet's Maker's Box, which you can only get with the Maker's Box. So I'm deciding exactly which part of the paper I want on each side of the box, and I'm going to paint the entire box with white chalk paint. This will allow all the colors to pop. Once I get it painted, I'm using some DIY's liquid patina. I'm brushing that on. I'll spritz my decoupage paper with water, and then I will lay it down into that liquid patina. Once I have it positioned, I'll go ahead and spritz it with some more water and brush a little bit more of the liquid patina on top. I wanted that side to dry before I went on with the other sides, so I'm going to go ahead and paint the little knob that I did remove. I just had to pull it off. It was glued on and had a couple of little tacks in there to keep it on, but I'm using gold rub and buff to paint that knob. Now I'm going to move on to the second side, again applying that liquid patina, spritzing my decoupage paper, and then placing it down into the wet liquid patina, adding more liquid patina to the top of the paper, and we'll set that aside to dry as well. I followed that same process for the third side. Once all three sides were dry, I used my finger sander and I sanded off any of the excess decoupage paper. This will give it a nice clean line. Now I decided I wanted to use some of the blue paint from, this was Midnight Blue by Fusion, that was included in Sonnet's Maker's Box. So I went ahead and painted over the edges and the back and bottom of the box with this Midnight Blue. Of course, I felt like I needed to add a little bit of gold to this, so I'm accenting the edges of the front of the little drawer with a sponge brush and gold rub and buff. I used Tight Bond Quick and Thick to add the knob back to the front. I took some of my scraps of the gilded transfers from IOD and rubbed them in random places on the box. These transfers finished off this piece nicely. This next one is probably my favorite today. This is another one of Sonnet's digital downloads, and it's several crocks in this picture, and I'm going to kind of fussy cut around the crocks just outside of the lines of the crocks so that they will stand out a little bit. Once I get them cut out, I'm using this little canvas that I got from Dollar Tree, and I am just going to decoupage these onto the front. Now I did print this on my computer and I did spritz it with water, but I didn't have any trouble with it running or anything. So the ink did not run at all. It worked just fine, but I didn't spritz it very heavily. So I've got a little starter strip there with the liquid patina by DIY. I am careful to coat the whole front of the canvas so that the entire piece will have the same finish. As cute as this piece is already, I wanted to add just a little something more. So I got out my typesetter stamps by IOD and I stamped on the phrase, "What a crock." Who doesn't need just a little bit of humor in their lives? Before stamping, I did place a book underneath this canvas so that I would have something hard to press the stamps against. Now, how adorable is this, really? This project, I'm going to use this thrifted frame that I did paint gold with spray paint, and I'm also going to be using one of Connie's Lines and Designs rice papers that are also included in the maker's box. She includes 2 designs that you can't get anywhere else, just like Roycycle. Now this piece for me was perfection just as it was, so I used a thrifted photo mat and simply taped it to the back of that mat. To bring out the details in this frame, I used some black wax and some other antique gold rub and buff. Now I'm just going to add the picture into the frame. I used some foam board for the backing, and this project is complete. I love thrifting old cutting boards, and this one was definitely worse for wear. So I sanded down as much as I could, and I'm going to be using this antique wax, and I will stain the entire piece. This cutting board is actually from the Goodwill bins in Little Rock, Arkansas. Once it was stained, I did paint the other side with white chalk paint. This is just Snow White by Waverly. And I did go ahead and stain the top of that handle on this side as well. This is the second decoupage paper by Roycycled that is in the June Makers box, and I'm going to be using this beautiful crock right here for the front of this cutting board. So I cut out the piece I wanted to use, and I'm just going to use some DIY's liquid patina to adhere that down to the cutting board. Now I did paint underneath it white so that it would really bring out the details. I don't think it really would have mattered in this case because the details are so dark anyway. I think leaving it dark would have been fine too. So I'm doing a little starter strip with that liquid patina. I'm spritzing my decoupage paper, and then I'm adding that liquid patina to the top as well. Once it was completely dry, I went back with my finger sander and I sanded off those edges. If you don't wait until it is completely dry, you do run the risk of tearing your paper. I have done this too many times by getting in a hurry, so I let this one dry completely. Now I'm adding just a rag bow. These are strips of fabric that I cut, and I'm just going to tie them to the top, and then this little cutting board is complete as well. This is the Be Kind rice paper included in the June Makers box. Again, this one is by Connie's. I'm just taking a wet brush and I am going around the design where I want to tear it out. Now I have found that rice paper tears little easily if you do it on the back as well. So I added water to the front and to the back and then tore out my design. I also applied a coat of white chalk paint to the back of this design so that those colors would pop. Because of what I'm putting it on top of, I wanted to add the white paint to the back of the paper. Now the interesting thing about this fabric Mod Podge is that once it's dry, it almost feels like rubber. So it's a very interesting texture. So I'm applying this to the back of the paper so that I don't have to apply it all over the fabric. You may want to put a piece of cardboard or something inside the bag so that it doesn't seep through. I didn't have a problem with it, so I did not put anything inside, but I am going over the top of the paper and all over the bag with that fabric Mod Podge. For this project, I'm going to be using the napkin that Sonnet includes in her box each month, an oyster shell, some Mod Podge, triple thick, and some UV resin. I'll also be using that gold paint pen that you see right there. So I chose out the bird that I wanted to decoupage onto this oyster shell, and I did remove one ply of the napkin. You want the thinnest part of the napkin. And now I'm using a wet paintbrush to go around the edge of the bird to make it fit onto the shell. Before adding the napkin, I did give the inside of the shell a couple of coats of white chalk paint. Once the paint was dry, I applied some Mod Podge to the center of the shell, and then I gently laid down my napkin and applied more Mod Podge over the top. Set that aside to dry, and then I used my triple thick and I painted over the top of the dried napkin. I'm using triple thick here because it does have a shine to it. It is glossy, and I like the glossy look for this shell. Now that gold paint pen I'm just using to trace around the edges of the shell to give it just a touch of bling, and I really like the way this looks. You can paint the back of the shell as well. I usually do not because I like the natural look of it. Now, once it's dry, I'm using UV resin to attach this shell to a bottle stopper that I ordered from Amazon. The stopper is just flat on the top. I added a little bit of hot glue to hold the shell in place long enough for me to squeeze some of that resin on there. Now this may look like it's a lot of trouble, but it's actually very, very quick. And that UV resin dries hard and holds better than any glue I've ever used. Now I am going over the resin with the gold paint pen again, and here is the final result. I would love to know what you think about today's projects. And I encourage you to check out Sonnet's YouTube channel. She has a podcast as well. And if you check out her website, you can find the links and everything to the Maker's Box. She also has Just a Papers box and Just a Paint box. So be sure and check that out. If you're interested in watching another video, I suggest this one right here. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to share the chic. Bye now.